fate. But at the end of the day, you knew many Democrats knew they had to get this government open once again. And we're still on day 41, by the way.
Yeah, so it's not open yet. And it's important to remember this entire thing was performative. The Democrats were never going to get, remember first it was the money for Medicaid and Medicare to go to illegals, okay? And then it pivoted to the Obamacare subsidies once they were losing that argument. So there was never a plan here. This was all shut down. But look, who can blame the Democrats? Last Tuesday was an absolute bloodbath for the Republicans. Yes, it was blue governors and blue states, but down the ticket, they got destroyed. So it's good that they're ending it now because the Democrats could have held out for much longer. Okay, from an investor standpoint, you have $1 trillion that the government has not spent that is draining global liquidity, and that's why I think stocks have gotten crushed over the last few weeks, despite having one of the best earnings seasons in recent memory. So look, I'm looking for a great year-end rally due to the government reopening, and I'm looking forward to not sitting on the tarmac for hours at a time when I fly across the country.
Yeah, but don't forget what Kevin Hassett told us last week when he was here, that people are not understanding how severe this impact to the economy has been. He said we were expecting 3% growth in the fourth quarter. Now we're expecting half of that, 1.5%. I'd say we're lucky to get that because it wasn't just the airlines and the travel sector that saw the impact. But what about financial services? How about all the capital markets activity like IPOs that came to a halt? How about the oil companies who wanted permits to get their business continuing? They weren't able to get the permits. That you're expecting a pretty good year-end rally.
Yeah, Maria, the dollar index, the DXY, went from like a 96 to a 101 late last week. And it's my belief that that is directly related to the shutdown and the U.S. government not spending money. So the Treasury general account north of $1 trillion. So there's a ton of liquidity sitting on the sideline, which caused a dollar shortage. This dollar shortage causes a sell-off. Dollar shortage led to a strengthening of the U.S. dollar relative to the rest of the world. That dollar strength led to a sell-off first in cryptocurrency, then the high-tech stocks. It is my belief that is why, like a Palantir, as Ken just mentioned, had unbelievable earnings, is on its way to the moon, but is down 30 or 40 bucks after a ridiculous beat, 18% quarter-over-quarter growth. So I think that's going to reverse itself. It's going to take a few weeks, and then, of course, the end of quantitative tightening is going to turn into a smaller version of quantitative easing. All this liquidity is going to get pumped in, backed by spectacular earnings, spectacular GDP growth, and we are off to the races.
Yeah, you were so spot on Palantir, Mike. You called that one so long ago. Could we want to be a nation of laws or not? Do we want to follow the law?
Maria, J.B. Pritzker is leading an open insurrection against our federal government. And the fact that no Democrats talk out against him and then more Republicans aren't saying this. Like, you can't resist federal immigration authority, federal officers on the street. You can't be openly assaulting them. If you want to resist them, you do it administratively through writing new laws, but none of these laws are popular enough. So we've engaged in basically domestic terrorism led by the governor of the state and the mayor of Chicago. It's absolutely disgusting. The Trump administration should throw the book at everyone involved.
Yeah, wait till the New York mayor gets in place because, Cheryl, he said he wants to President. Mike, we're going to feel the impact of this next year when we start looking at fourth quarter numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's on the back of third quarter numbers tracking at 4% GDP growth after 3% in the second quarter. Look, there was nothing to accomplish here for the Democrats. Okay, right. Chuck Schumer desperately wants to hold on to power. Okay, and that's why we're here. That's it. There was no plan.
No, they did. They had plans. Their plan was to create chaos in President Trump's agenda. That's what they did.
Yeah, look, nothing gained for anyone here other than some federal workers who are going to get hired back. A lot of negatives with very little positives. But hey, after the Democrats won substantially last week, it doesn't really matter to them.
No, they were riding a blue wave. All right, quick break, and we'll be right back. How do you balance this look at all these trillions of dollars coming into the economy? I mean, look, by the way, President Trump has been able to lure $18 trillion of new investment just in the last 9 months on his watch into America. But that doesn't even, include some of the money going into data centers. Michael, you've got lots of money moving into data centers, and yet the macro story seems to be coming down a bit. Consumer sentiment falling sharply in the last month. You have worries about jobs. The University of Michigan index dropped near record lows rose to 40.3. Americans are growing worried about job security. We had the Challenger report last week showing more than 153,000 job cuts in the month of October, the highest for the month in 22 years. So what do you want to say about this balance that we're talking about? On the one hand, a revolution, more money moving into data centers and AI. On the other hand, weaker sentiment and rising layoffs.
Yeah, so a few things in there. So first, we'll talk about the sentiment that the University of Michigan is a hyper-partisan survey, and it leans very far to the left. And if you look on the underlying of that survey, the difference between Republican current expectations of the economy and Democrats is the widest it's ever been. The Democrats, as you could predict, are feeling like there's an apocalypse and everything's terrible, and the Republicans are feeling like things are pretty good. But then as you move into this data center AI revolution, yes, there are going to be trillions and trillions of dollars coming into the economy and into the market. Okay, if you were not part of that, or you're in a mid-level white-collar job, okay, your ability to change jobs and your future of your career is extremely threatened by AI at the moment. And yes, historical technology trends have net added more jobs as they move along, but nothing has happened with this rate of change. So we are in a situation where 2 or 3 years from now, we could have a 5% GDP growth on the back of all this AI, and then 5 or 10% unemployment from everybody being laid off from all this efficiency, and years before those people get back into the workforce. So really interesting scenario as to how that plays out. I will say CoreWeave, my favorite data center play, reports after the bell. CEO's been on here a bunch of times. I think it's going to be spectacular earnings.
Yeah, I mean, look, and think about all the money that President Trump has been able to. Weeks before President Trump is about to start his first term in 2017. All this is all over the place, going viral. Smears, lies of collusion and cheating going across the world. Just 2 weeks before he's about to take the helm in the Oval Office.
Maria, not only did they weaponize the power of the United States government, okay, to frame a sitting president as an agent of a hostile foreign nation, okay, we now have the Russia-Ukraine war. Okay, millions of people have died because of this nonsense, right? So even if you're not a Trump fan, even if you think Trump had something to do with Russia, okay, you can agree that had they not done this, there likely would have been a diplomatic channel to stop that war.
Oh, yeah. So there was such a dereliction of duty, and the dereliction of duty goes even beyond that, because look where we are with China. As they were saying, Russia, 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 China was eating our lunch. Now we're dependent on 90% of the ovined and delivered to the president's desk. But you're talking about a serious hit to the economy in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, for what? Like, why do we do it? What was the goal of this? At first, it was for Medicaid subsidies so that they could keep paying for illegals' health care, because in all these sanctuary cities and all these sanctuary states, their hospitals are facing shortfalls because illegal immigrants are using the emergency room for primary care. So that is extremely costly to the taxpayer, to the hospital, to the Medicaid. So once you take away those subsidies, then it became about more subsidies to plug the gaps of the Affordable Care Act, or so we're told. But basically, when the Democrats did this earlier this year and they passed a budget resolution, Chuck Schumer came under a tremendous amount of heat for not fighting the Republicans. Well, you can't fight for anything. If you just shut down the government with no end in sight, no goal in sight, it's really hard to win. And now you have real people facing real consequences. And yes, there are tons of fraud in the EBT and SNAP program, but there are still millions of Americans that depend on that, unfortunately, to eat. And so you've had to cut back that. You've had Border Patrol agents getting shot at in Chicago without getting a paycheck. And then you have this mess that is the travel sector. What do we gain here? Everything is hyper political, hyper partisan. It's always a game of power for these Democrats. So look, I'm glad that we're going to put this behind us, and I think equities in the short and medium term are going to be the primary beneficiary.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one win that the election, Mike.
Yeah, Maria, look, the historical rejection rates for mail-in ballots is 6%. That declined by a factor of 20 in the 2020 election, while the number of mail-in ballots increased by a factor of 20. And to say these states broke their own laws, there was no signature verification, and to sue on that behalf, somehow the Biden administration turned that into a federal crime. Okay, it is not against the law to follow the appropriate channels and sue to try to say, I don't like how this election was contested. You deserve your day in court, and whether you win or lose, that should be the end of it, not trying to throw people in jail for exercising their constitutional rights. And what this was a persecution, and it's the communist mindset. We need to destroy anybody, any wrongthink, anybody who gets in the way of our power. It's the same thing that we were just talking about with the Russiagate investigation, in that they were using Russia as a way to try to ruin Donald Trump and anybody who stands up and fights against the status quo. And then, you had the election challenges, January 6th, and these nonstop going after Trump. It's why they looked into Truth Social. They need to find out who the people that are, who the dissenters are in this country. All the things our founders worried about, and tried to prevent with the laws of the land. The previous administration just, took a match to it and said, we don't care. We're going to try to criminalize dissent in any way, shape, or form possible. And if you don't have the money, we're going to ruin your life. If you look at what they've done to people like John Eastman, one of the foremost constitutional scholars in our country, just try to disbar them and ruin them. They're doing the same thing to Jeffrey Clark, Rudy Giuliani, just ruin these people's lives in any way, shape, or form possible.
That's right.
For simply exercising their constitutional rights. It's unfortunate that Donald Trump has to use this pardon power to do this, but here we are.
Yeah, good for him. And by the way, what I thought was funny, Liz, what did they say that Joe Biden got in?
Look, this is the makings of a communist society. This is exactly how the KGB runs, right? And if you think about it, going all the way back to the Russia hoax, you had Andrew Weissman, one of the most corrupt prosecutors in the history of the United States, responsible for Arthur Anderson no longer existing, overturned 9-0 by the Supreme Court, only for the next one with Jack Smith, responsible for going after Bob McDonald in Virginia, because he was a potential threat to Obama. They wanted this guy out of the race, and overturned 9-0 by the Supreme Court. Do you know how few criminal cases make it to the Supreme Court, let alone get overturned 9-0? Well, here's two prosecutors right now that went after Trump. And then you add that to all the other lawfare in Georgia, in New York City, in New York State. Every single one of these, you can trace the roots back to the Biden White House and the same players from the Obama administration pulling the strings to try to go after Trump. They will touch everything. They will go after everything. They are the most aggressive, egregious prosecutors that have ever existed in our country. They're all going after Trump as a way to get to us.
Don't forget, it's all the same players. Jake Sullivan was the guy who was running around with Hillary Clinton's, Twitter saying Trump colluded with Russia. And then, of course, he got a big job in the Biden administration. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Honor our veterans.
Good point. Mike.
So first, happy 250th birthday to the United States Marine Corps. And CoreWeave earnings after the bell. I think you're going to see amazing earnings, amazing guidance, and then we're back off the races once this government gets opened.
All right, we'll be waiting for that. And of course, we begin 30 minutes.